Hello, BookTube. It's April 1st, April Fool's Day, Easter Sunday, the beginning of a new month, and that means that all over BookTube people are doing their March wrap-ups and their April TBRs. And I want to join in on the fun, but in the month of April, I plan on reading far too many books to list in one video. So what I tend to do on this channel is not a TBR, but a TBR BY, to be read by you, where I make 10 recommendations for the upcoming month of books I've already read that are really good. And I want to do that this time around and split the group 5 fiction and 5 nonfiction. And some of the fiction and some of the nonfiction are things we've already seen on this channel that I've just got around to reading. So I know whether or not I can recommend them, and I heartily do. So we'll start with fiction, and the first fiction on the list is the best novel that's coming out in April, and that's The Female Persuasion by Meg Wolitzer. A fantastic book about a dreamy undergraduate young woman who meets her intellectual idol and against all odds is taken into that idol's tutorship. And they form a relationship, but really the book is about finding that one mentor, that one amazing person who sees things in you that you didn't see were there yourself, and how that's not always an unmixed blessing when it changes your life. And reading this, I have to believe that this book is born out of Meg Wolitzer's own obligation to such a figure in her own past, but one way or another, I have an intimate working knowledge of that particular kind of relationship, and I've never seen it done better on the written page. And I've very seldom seen it done anywhere close to this good when the two people involved are both women. I just thought it was a tremendously successful novel, especially since it has an area where if it were mere, thinly disguised polemic, it would be immediately obvious. And that's the fact that the young woman has a boyfriend. And he would not be convincing if this were that kind of novel, and instead he's just as convincing a character as all the others. So I mean, you're going to see The Female Persuasion in all of your bookstores. You're going to see it in every magazine and newspaper and review list. You're probably going to see a lot of it on BookTube, and I'll just gladly add to that bandwagon. It's a tremendous performance by one of our greatest living writers. Then the next book is a sorry about the thunderous noise. It's the price you pay for living in a war zone. It'll all be quieter tomorrow during the blizzard. But anyway, the next book is police procedural. It's tremendously gripping, but it's also very sad. It's called Greeks Bearing Gifts, and it's by Philip Kerr. And it's the latest novel of his, starring former Berlin police detective Bernie Gunther, who during the war years had the unenviable job of trying to solve murders while also dealing with the politics of not getting killed by the Nazis who were his bosses. And in this latest novel, it's years later, the war is long over. He is living under an assumed identity because he'd rather not have anyone come knocking at his door accusing him of collusion, of being a war criminal. And during that ordinary life of his, he is, in this novel, drawn into a case in which someone who was a murderer during the war in Berlin may be on the loose again, or a strict copycat may be on the loose. And he can't help it. Once he is acquainted with this crime, he can't help himself. Underneath the hangdog exterior, underneath the mordant sense of humor, Bernie Gunther is a bloodhound. He can't let injustice go. And the book is incredibly good. Just incredibly good. And the reason that it's sad is because Philip Kerr died. There aren't going to be any more Bernie Gunther novels. So I soaked this one up, and I always see them at charity shops and at the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston. I always see older ones. So I will be just savoring all of the older ones as I go along. And the next book is also a police procedural, and it's also something that I've sung the praises of on this channel before, but I want to sing the praises again just one last time. And that is Macbeth by the crime novelist Jo Nesbo. And it is the latest in the Hogarth Shakespeare series, which is a series of books by Hogarth Press where they ask well-known, illustrious, best-selling authors to do a take on a canonical Shakespeare work. And there have been hits and misses. Some authors that I really like have just whiffed when they got to the plate. But this one by Jo Nesbo it's obviously, you can tell from the title, it's a resetting of Shakespeare's Macbeth in a modern day police procedural setting, and it works perfectly. It is so enjoyable. It's I think the longest Hogarth Shakespeare book, and it's by far my favorite one. So I want to recommend it one more time, and I will list all of these books down below. And then the next book is by an author who is a darling of the literary world, of the reviewing world, of the bookstore world, and of BookTube. This is an author who has not put a foot wrong. Madeline Miller, her new book is Circe. She's the author of The Shield of Achilles, which does a very neat job reimagining certain aspects of the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus. And this is, as you can tell from the title, her reimagining of the story of the supernatural being who transforms Odysseus's crew into swine, and is romantically enamored of Odysseus himself. Sorry, I keep wanting to say Ulysses because I know these stories with their Roman names, so it's difficult for me to say Poseidon instead of Neptune. But I'll soldier through. And I loved The Shield of Achilles, and I worried about the next book, and this one is tremendously good. So again, you will see it all over BookTube, and you will also see it in your bookstores. And I view that as an encouraging sign that a couple of these things, that I don't have to stray away from the piled high display cases of a modern retail bookstore to find books that are really worth reading. I like that. It would bother me if the only thing I ever saw on those tables, the only thing that I had to recommend to you, were obscure things. I'm glad that some of these things are going to be well known and seen and read by everybody, because they deserve it. And then the last one is also an author she's certainly no stranger to those best-selling tables. Frances Mays. It's another book I've recommended on this channel, though. The book is Women in Sunlight, and it's about a writer who's living overseas and encounters a group of people who are engaging in their own enchanted April. They've decided, this group of women have decided to take a villa and, absorb the sunlight of an easier rhythm of life. And the pattern is well known. It's not just Enchanted April. It's been done a million times, and it's got a certain charm to it. Anyway, it's just like with Circe, it's the superstructure. Also like Macbeth. The superstructure is so solid that it gives the writer freedom to innovate and play around. And in this case, I've read everything that Frances May has ever written. I've never read anything of hers that was like this. I was warned ahead of time by a couple of people, including the book's publicist, that this was on a different register. It was a significantly different book, better, and boy oh boy, it was. So you're going to see it stacked in bookstores, and I very much recommend it. If you pick it up, you will like reading it. And then we'll move on to nonfiction, and a lot of these we've seen on this channel as well. I've just bumped them to the head of the list, read them right away to get an impression of them, or read them right away just because I was interested. And the first one is one of those. I think it appears in a mail haul just a couple of days ago. I think you could tell even in that haul that it utterly fascinated me. The subject fascinates me, and the book is tremendous. And it's Microbia by Eugenia Bone, and it's the story of microbes that live all over Earth, that own Earth, that have possession of it. And that subject matter is interesting enough as it is, just anyway. The full extent, the incredible evolutionary diversity, the fact that these things are life forms about which almost nobody knows anything. You've got the people who study them, but the ordinary general reader has no idea the prevalence or ingenuity of these creatures. That interested me anyway, but this author does a tremendously poetic job writing about them. This is popularizing science writing at its absolute best, which is fantastic. And so is the next one, although the next one is the opposite. With Microbia, I was already interested in the subject. This next one very much not. Not only not interested, but maybe a little antagonistic. And this book changed that. It's by Sarah Wilson, and it's called First We Make the Beast Beautiful. And it's a book about anxiety. It's a book, not just, the light passing mental idea, oh my God, I've got a test later today and it's making me anxious, but actual clinical anxiety, the type of thing that just chills your heart, that freezes you in place, and that you don't have any control over, or that you feel like you don't have any control over. She suffers from anxiety and has studied it. And I admit I went into the book with an uncharitable mind frame. It's been my experience that most of the people in my life who have claimed to be victims of anxiety are crybabies, and they're not actually experiencing anything that they can't overlook, overcome, or control. This book went a long way towards acquainting me with a spectrum of anxiety that isn't like that at all. That's like clinical depression, where the overdiagnosed and over-medicated aspects of what we might consider, for instance, depression, infuriate me, because it's reached a point where a 13-year-old will get serious mood-altering medication because he's not happy every single minute of every single day, and he'll call that depression. And that, in my opinion, hurts the acceptance of the actual physical ailment of clinical depression that can shut down your whole life for 2-3 weeks on end, and that actually does need medical attention. Same thing with anxiety, where I believe that it becomes a buzzword, it becomes overdiagnosed and overprescribed, and you get teenagers who do feel anxious about an upcoming test, but claim they have the actual medical problem when they don't. And this was an incredible entry into the world of real anxiety. I thought it was done with amazing compassion, so I highly recommend it if you or somebody you know experiences actual anxiety attacks, but also just as the experience of sticking with this author through her adventures, I recommend it. Then we're gonna move into biography for these next two, because I can't do a list like this without big fat biographies. First one is President Carter of the White House Years by Stuart Eizenstadt, a big, thick new study of President Jimmy Carter's one term in office as president. And I've read every book on the Carter presidency, and this is amazingly good. By far the best one that I've read, and yet accessible. This author has done a vast amount of research, and yet the book is accessible, and gives you a lot of insight into the importance of Carter in the presidential lineup. I think a lot of people. He was in the news just recently. He did a few interviews. He's got a new book. He's like 93, but he has a new book, a faith memoir. And so to the extent that he can, he has been doing interviews, sitting down and talking with news hosts and that sort of thing. And being who he is, they can't possibly just talk to him about a 120-page faith memoir. They want to talk to him about the current state of affairs in American politics. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who has watched those interviews and been deeply, deeply embarrassed for the current state of American leadership. This is a person who's 93, who's been treated for serious cancer, who needs help to walk around, and all the other ailments of being in your 9th decade, and in 5 minutes is more coherent, more thoughtful, more well-spoken than the current president of the United States or anything connected with him. And that's heartbreaking. That really is. It felt like those interviews, especially when you hear him actually talking about U.S. policy, U.S. politics, felt like a glimpse of another era, which is kind of melancholy considering how short a time ago he was president of the United States. But this was much more than that. This book was far different from a trip down memory lane. A lot of the current glut of presidential books very much are looking in the direction of memory lane, but this was a serious study of his years on the world stage, and I highly recommend it if you remember the Carter presidency, or if you're interested in a time period that did a lot more to shape the present day than most other time periods. I highly recommend it. In terms of popular presidential biographies, it's the best that April has to afford, including The Moralist, which is the big new book about Woodrow Wilson. I do recommend that, but this is even better. And then the next one is by a biographer who can do no wrong. There's a biographer named Jenny Uglow who's done many, many biographies. They're all great. She's fantastic. For instance, her Hogarth biography, her biography of the artist Hogarth, is incredible. Just an amazing, rollicking adventure. And this is very similar. Her new book is Mr. Lear, by Edward Lear, the artist. And like with the Hogarth book, the art is only one aspect of the book. She delves into the whole breadth of his life and all the weird and interesting things that he did. In a lot of details that you think of Edward Lear, you immediately think of some of his signature artwork or a couple of his nonsense poems, but you don't realize the full complexity of his life, and she brings it out fantastically. And the wonderful thing about her books is that they are great reading experiences. It's not just that you're learning about the subject, it's that she has you firmly in her hand as a narrator the whole time. That's just wonderful. And then the last book I want to recommend, the last nonfiction and the last of this April TBR BY, is by Jonathan Jimenez, and it's called Naturalia. It's a picture book. It's in the other room, but I meant to show it on camera, but that's all right. It's a picture book of man-made places, houses, train stations, subway platforms that have been abandoned and allowed to be reclaimed by nature. And you see the steps that takes and what they end up looking like. And it's amazing. It's amazing. Like, if you're anything like me, when you're looking at these places, you will start to imagine the places that you know now, the man-made places that you know now, and what they would be like in 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years, 30 years. It's a great coffee table pictorial of how nature is just waiting. It's just patiently waiting. If it's not beaten back all the time, it immediately moves in. And to see that in pictures like this, such beautiful photography on page after page after page, was thrilling in its own way. So there you go. That is 10 recommendations. I'll remember to list everything down below. Fiction and nonfiction for the month of April that I heartily recommend. Now, this channel, we do a lot of talk about books. There's going to be a lot of talk about books that come out in April. So these won't be my only book recommendations for April. But I wanted to put these out there. Again, the TBR BY is like if I were with you in a retail bookstore, or if we were together walking along the new release section of your library, and you saw one of these things and wanted to know, is this any good? Have you read it? I wanted this to be sort of the equivalent of that in video form. But I'm going to wrap this up for now, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.